My name is Vanessa Harper, and I was 37 years old when I finally realized my family had quietly attached a dollar amount to my kindness. Nobody had ever asked if I was willing to carry that burden. They simply assumed I always would. The day everything changed started with bad news, though not the kind that breaks a person. Early that Friday morning, my phone buzzed while I was reviewing blueprints in my office. "Vanessa, I'm sorry," Mr. Aldridge said through the speaker. "The investors backed out. The Riverside in restoration is dead." I leaned back in my chair and stared through the window overlooking Greystone Harbor. The 6-month project we'd spent weeks preparing for was gone. Nearly a quarter of my annual revenue disappeared in a 5-minute phone call.
Still, I didn't panic.
I'd spent 14 years rebuilding old properties that storms, neglect, and time had nearly destroyed. One lost contract wasn't going to ruin me. What bothered me wasn't the money. It was knowing I would have to explain it to people who had never once bothered to understand what I actually did. To my family, I worked construction. Close enough, apparently. That evening, I made the same drive I'd made nearly every weekend for the last year and a half. 3 hours inland. Back to Pine Ridge. Back to the house I'd grown up in. Back to responsibility. 18 months earlier, my father had suffered a heart attack while mowing the lawn. I got the call during a job site inspection and drove without stopping. Somehow, a weekend visit became weeks, and weeks became months. My life remained on the coast. My obligations stayed in Pine Ridge, and I spent every Friday crossing the miles between the two. As I pulled into the driveway, 2 unfamiliar vehicles were parked outside. My cousin Marcus's pickup, and a black SUV belonging to my younger sister Chelsea's boyfriend, Trent. I sat behind the wheel for a second. Visitors on a Friday evening usually meant one thing. Somebody had already made a decision about me, and I was the last person invited to the conversation. The screen door slammed before I'd even reached the hallway. Chelsea's voice carried into the entrance. "So, I heard the project fell apart."
No, hello.
"No, how are you?" "Just business." She sat on the couch scrolling through her phone while Trent lounged beside her with his boots on the coffee table. Mom occupied her usual recliner, and our neighbor, Mrs. Hanley, sat nearby pretending she wasn't listening. "It wasn't canceled because of me," I said calmly. "Their investors pulled out." Chelsea barely looked up. "So, who's paying my SUV note this month?" The room went quiet. Not "did you eat?" Not "are you okay?" Not even "that sucks." Just a bill. Mom, Diane Harper, folded her hands. "Sweetheart, don't get upset. We'll figure things out. We always do."
We.
Interesting word, because we usually meant me. Marcus stood near the kitchen and avoided my eyes. I looked around. "How long have you all known?" Trent shrugged. "My cousin works for one of the suppliers. News gets around."
Hours.
They'd known for hours. Sat in this room. Discussed my situation. And somehow the biggest concern was Chelsea's monthly payment. I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes disappointment arrives so often, it loses its ability to surprise you. Before I could say another word, Dad emerged from the hallway. Walter Harper carried a flat cardboard box under his arm. He set it on the coffee table. Then he opened it. "Your sister and Trent need more space," he said quietly. "They're talking about getting married." I stared at him.
He wouldn't look me in the eyes.
Mom delivered the next line so smoothly it sounded rehearsed. "Chelsea needs this house more than you do, Vanessa." Mrs. Hanley suddenly became fascinated with her tea. Chelsea never even lifted her head. Dad walked toward my room. I followed. He entered the room I'd slept in for 18 months. The room where I'd kept stacks of invoices beside old family photos. The room I'd returned to after every exhausting work week. Without a word, he started folding my shirts into the box. The same hands that taught me how to swing a hammer. The same man who taught me how to change a tire. Packing me up like I was temporary furniture. "You're serious?" I asked. Dad swallowed. "You've always landed on your feet," Mom called from the living room.
Exactly.
"Vanessa always figures things out." There it was. The family motto. Vanessa always figures things out.
Which meant nobody else had to.
I stared around the room. Everything suddenly felt strange, like I was seeing the house for the first time, or maybe seeing it clearly. On top of the dresser sat my grandmother Eleanor's old sewing tin. She'd given it to me when I was 12. I picked it up and held it against my chest. Then I felt the weight of a small ring of keys in my pocket. Keys nobody in that house knew anything about. And I decided they still wouldn't. I looked at Dad. "You aren't throwing me out." He finally met my eyes.
No.
I picked up the box myself. "I'm choosing to leave." Mom sighed dramatically. "Oh, don't be so sensitive." Sensitive? After 18 months of paying overdue taxes, covering insurance, buying groceries, helping with medications, making Chelsea's car payments, driving 6 hours every weekend. Sensitive. I didn't argue.
Didn't yell. Didn't cry.
I simply lifted the box, walked to the front door, and left. Nobody followed. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked where I would go. Not even Dad. 3 hours later, the salty air of Greystone Harbor greeted me like an old friend. The lights reflecting off the marina felt more like home than Pine Ridge ever had. My apartment above Miller's Seafood Market welcomed me with silence. And for the first time in 18 months, silence felt peaceful. But I wasn't ready to go home. Instead, I drove another mile to our office. Harper Heritage Restoration. The sign outside still made me smile. My business partner, Rebecca Sloan, was inside despite the late hour. She looked up from her laptop. Then she noticed the box in my arms. Her eyebrows rose. "Well," she said softly, "looks like you've finally stopped carrying everyone else's house." I laughed tiredly. They made the decision for me. Rebecca closed her laptop. "Good." I blinked. "Good. Vanessa, I've watched you drain yourself for a year and a half. I've watched you wire money every month, drive 6 hours every weekend,
Cheap vacations.
skip your own life." She stood. "And every Monday you come back looking emptier." She nodded toward the box. "So now what?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I set the box on my desk. The old sewing tin sat on top. Beneath it was a folder I'd carried back and forth for years. Rebecca noticed. Her expression changed. "Is it time?" she asked quietly. I looked down at the folder, then out toward the dark harbor beyond the window. For the first time in 18 months, the rope I'd been holding so tightly had finally slipped from my hands. And strangely enough, I didn't feel like I was falling. I felt free. That first night back in Greystone Harbor, I didn't sleep. Sleep requires peace. And while I wasn't angry anymore, I wasn't peaceful either. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier and started untangling the quiet knots I'd spent years tying. First came the property taxes on my parents' house. Every payment had been drafted automatically from my account. 2 clicks.
Gone.
Next came the homeowner's insurance. Another 2 clicks.
Gone.
Then I opened the account for Chelsea's SUV. I couldn't simply remove my name. Co-signing didn't work that way. I knew the risks. If she defaulted, my credit would take a hit too. But suddenly, carrying a bruise felt lighter than carrying 15 more years of responsibility. I sent one message. "Chelsea, I'm no longer making the payments. They're your responsibility now. Please don't ignore them."
No explanation. No argument.
Just truth. Then I went through every expense I'd quietly absorbed. Groceries,
Prescription copie.
streaming services, the monthly internet bill, Dad's golf membership he'd stopped using after his heart attack. Small things, invisible things, the kind nobody notices because they're accustomed to someone else handling them. By midnight, every one of them was gone. Not because I wanted revenge, because walls can't support houses they've already walked away from. Finally, I unlocked the folder. Rebecca had asked me earlier if it was time. Maybe it was. Inside sat documents I'd kept secret for 3 years. A deed. My name. One property. Seabrook Cottage. 40 minutes north of Greystone Harbor. It wasn't huge, but it sat on a quiet bluff overlooking the water. White siding. Blue shutters. A wraparound porch. And enough peace to heal a soul. Nobody in Pine Ridge knew about it.
Not Mom.
Not Dad. Not Chelsea. Not even Grandma Eleanor. Whenever Mom asked where all my money went, I'd shrug and say business was slow. The truth? I'd spent 3 years quietly building a future nobody could take from me. I closed the folder, and for the first time in months, I slept. Saturday morning, my phone exploded. 23 missed calls, 11 texts, 6 voicemails. Chelsea led the charge. What do you mean you stopped the car payment? Call me now. Are you serious? Mom's messages followed. Vanessa, your sister is hysterical. This isn't the time for selfishness. Families help each other. That one almost made me laugh. Families. Interesting word. I hadn't felt like family the night they packed my clothes. Dad hadn't texted. Not one message. Marcus had. You okay?
Just that. No guilt.
No pressure. No sides. Simple concern. I answered.
I'm fine. 3 dots appeared.
Then disappeared. Finally. You sure? I stared at the screen. Nobody had asked me that in a long time.
No.
But I'll be okay. His reply came instantly.
Good.
Because something feels off over here. By Monday morning, Rebecca and I were back to work. Losing the Riverside in Project hurt, but our company wasn't built on one client. We'd survived worse. The office buzzed with normal life. Contractors called. Invoices arrived. A new historical church restoration opportunity popped up. Life moved. Funny how the world doesn't stop just because your heart hurts. Around noon, Marcus called. His voice sounded uneasy. You busy? Not really. You know anything about a home equity line? I frowned.
No.
Silence. Your mom mentioned one yesterday. My stomach tightened. What home equity line? I thought you knew. Knew what? Marcus sighed. Vanessa, I probably shouldn't be saying this. Then don't dance around it. He lowered his voice. Uncle Walter was asking your mom questions. They were arguing. About. He didn't understand some paperwork. What paperwork? I don't know, but I heard your name. My heart skipped. My name?
Yeah.
Marcus hesitated. Something about you helping secure it. I settled in my chest. Marcus, I never signed anything. I figured. That's why I'm calling. A memory surfaced. 2 years earlier, Mom had handed me several papers while Dad recovered. Insurance forms, medical documents, bank papers. I'd signed things without reading carefully. Because I trusted her. Because she was Mom. Because families don't trick each other.
Right?
After hanging up, I sat frozen. Rebecca noticed immediately. What's wrong? I told her. Her expression hardened. Get copies. Of what? Everything. Rebecca.
No.
She leaned forward. Stop assuming. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe. Her eyes narrowed. But maybe it isn't. 3 days later, my mother called. Not to apologize. Not to ask how I was. Not because she missed me. Vanessa. Her tone sounded annoyed. Chelsea says you stopped paying her car. I did. She's under stress. So am I. Then came the familiar sigh. You've always been stronger. There it was again. Strong. The word that somehow translated into responsible for everyone.
I'm tired, Mom.
Everybody's tired. You threw me out. We didn't throw you out. I closed my eyes. Dad packed my clothes. You made it dramatic.
No.
You made it easy. Silence. Then another weapon. Do you know what I went through after losing those babies before Chelsea was born? I shut my eyes. There it was. The grief she'd carried for 30 years. The grief she'd used to explain everything. Including why Chelsea never had to grow up. Including why I always had to. Including why love came with conditions. Softly I said, I understand, Mom. She paused. I don't think you do. I understand more than you know. You don't know what it's like to lose children.
No.
My voice remained calm. But grief isn't a debt I owe forever. Silence. Real silence. Then she delivered the final blow.
Fine.
We'll celebrate Grandma Eleanor's birthday without you. And suddenly, Everything became clear. Not because she'd hurt me, but because she'd tried to. I hung up. Rebecca looked up from across the office. Bad. I smiled sadly.
No.
She frowned.
No.
I think I just stopped hoping she'll become somebody she's never been. And somehow, that hurt less than I expected. Because hope, I discovered, can be heavier than heartbreak. And for the first time in my life, I was finally setting it down. Thursday afternoon brought rain to Greystone Harbor. The kind that rolled in slowly off the water and turned the windows silver. Rebecca and I had just finished reviewing bids when my phone buzzed. Marcus. Again. I answered immediately. Everything okay? Not really. His voice sounded low. Chelsea's SUV got flagged.
What?
Missed payment notice. I leaned back in my chair. It's been less than a week. She thought you'd cave. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because that sentence explained my entire role in the family.
Abay sumati de kaba.
Everybody assumed I'd fix it. Everybody assumed I'd come running. Marcus continued. And your mother is losing her mind. About the car?
No.
He paused. Money. I frowned. What money? Uncle Walter found out the taxes weren't paid. I blinked. They were due next month. Apparently your mother thought they already went through. Of course she did. For 18 months, she'd never had to think about due dates. Bills simply disappeared. Problems solved themselves. Because I'd been quietly standing between them and consequences. How's Dad? I asked. Marcus sighed. Confused. Confused? He thought you were still staying there. What? He keeps saying, Vanessa's coming Friday. Something twisted inside me. Dad had packed my clothes. But somehow part of him still believed I'd be walking through that door. I thanked Marcus and ended the call. Rebecca studied me. You still love him.
Ido.
That doesn't mean you owe him. I nodded. She was right. Love and obligation weren't the same thing. I'd spent years confusing them. Saturday morning I drove 40 minutes north. Not to Pine Ridge. To Seabrook Cottage. The moment I turned onto the gravel driveway, my chest loosened. The house sat exactly as I remembered. White cedar siding. Blue shutters. Hydrangeas blooming along the fence. And beyond it, the ocean. No drama.
No shouting.
Just waves. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Sunlight poured through the windows. Everything smelled faintly of pine and salt. I'd bought the place 3 years earlier after closing the biggest project of my career. Not because I wanted luxury. Because I wanted peace. A place that belonged to nobody but me. The upstairs bedroom overlooked the water. The porch wrapped around the entire front of the house. And there, hanging near the entrance, was the sign I'd ordered months earlier. Welcome home. Not Harper home. Not family home. Not Mom's house.
Mine.
I smiled. And for the first time in years, the word home didn't hurt. Later that afternoon, I drove to see Grandma Eleanor. She lived in Maple Grove Assisted Living, 20 minutes from Pine Ridge. Her memory faded in and out these days. Some days she remembered every detail. Other days she forgot breakfast.
But she always remembered me.
Always. When I entered her room, she smiled immediately. There's my girl. I hugged her carefully. You remember me? She patted my cheek. Vanessa. I'd know those eyes anywhere. Tears threatened, but I swallowed them. She noticed. You've been crying.
I'm okay.
No, you aren't. Grandma Eleanor had always possessed the strange gift of seeing through people.
You sat beside her.
They threw me out. Her expression changed.
Who?
Mom. Eleanor Harper raised no fool.
No, Grandma.
Mom and Dad. For a moment confusion crossed her face. Then anger. Real anger. They packed her things. I blinked. You remember that? She nodded. Marcus told me. She squeezed my hand. They've leaned on you your whole life. I smiled sadly. I know.
No.
Her voice sharpened. You know it, but you still don't believe you deserve better. The room grew quiet. Then she pointed a shaky finger toward me. Listen carefully. I leaned closer. The strongest mule gets loaded first. I laughed softly. What? My daddy used to say that. She smiled. People load the strongest mule until its knees give out. She squeezed my hand. Sometimes love means putting the saddle down. I laughed through tears. Only Grandma could compare my emotional collapse to farm animals. But somehow, it made perfect sense. That evening, I received another call. This time from Dad. I stared at the screen. 3 rings.
4.
Then I answered.
E.
Silence. Then his quiet voice. You okay? I froze. Those 2 words. Simple.
Small.
But they nearly broke me.
I'm okay.
He cleared his throat. House feels strange. I looked out toward the ocean.
Yeah.
I thought you'd come Friday. I don't live there anymore. Silence. Then, your mother said you needed space. I closed my eyes. Needed space. Interesting translation for being thrown out. Dad. Did you want me to leave? Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice sounded tired. I didn't stop it. Not an answer, but somehow more honest. I know. I thought it had settled down. It didn't.
No.
Neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered. She misses you. Not I miss you. She misses you. And somehow that told me everything. I'm glad Grandma's birthday is coming, he continued. Mom said you're not coming. I haven't decided. Another pause. Then, quietly.
She'd like that. He meant Grandma, not Mom. Grandma.
And I understood. Dad wasn't calling because he'd suddenly found courage. He was calling because he missed peace. And I was the person who'd always provided it. But peace built on one person sacrificing themselves isn't peace. It's dependency. After hanging up, I sat on the porch watching the sun disappear over the water. Rebecca called. How's paradise? Quiet. Good quiet. The best kind. She laughed. By the way, something weird happened. What? Someone submitted an inquiry through the Harbor Heritage website. We get dozens. This one's interesting. Why? Rebecca chuckled. The customer wants to rent Zebra Cottage. I frowned. The cottage? For an 80th birthday celebration. My heartbeat slowed. What name? Paper shuffled. Then Rebecca read it. Diane Harper.
You said uprights.
What? Your mother. The ocean breeze suddenly felt colder. Mom had gone online, found pictures of the cottage, fallen in love with it, and had absolutely no idea. The place she wanted for Grandma Eleanor's birthday belonged to me. Rebecca started laughing. Oh, Vanessa. I stared toward the waves, neither laughing nor angry, just amazed. Life had a strange sense of humor, because after throwing me out of one house, my mother was unknowingly asking permission to celebrate in another. And she had no idea whose name sat on the deed. Rebecca and I sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then she grinned. You know this is poetic, right? I shook my head slowly.
No.
Vanessa, your mother spent years acting like she owned every piece of your life. Now she's asking permission to use something you built with your own hands. I leaned back in my chair. It wasn't built for this. I know. Rebecca's smile softened. But maybe life built it for this. I looked again at the inquiry on the screen. Diane Harper, 80 years old. Family celebration. 30 guests. Special request. Somewhere peaceful where Mom can watch the ocean. She's always wanted one last birthday by the water. My chest tightened. Not because of Mom. Because of Grandma Eleanor.
She deserved that.
Rebecca noticed the conflict immediately. You're thinking about your grandmother. Of course I am. Then do it for her. I stared out at the waves. Without telling Mom? Rebecca smiled. Your company handles the rentals. Your name isn't anywhere in the listing. She doesn't need to know. I laughed softly. You're dangerous.
No. I'm practical.
She winked. And frankly, I want to see how long it takes your mother to recognize your taste in curtains. The booking deposit arrived the next morning. No questions.
No negotiations.
Mom had fallen in love with the pictures and sent payment immediately. Rebecca handled every email. As far as Diane Harper knew, Harbor Heritage Event Services was managing the property. Not her oldest daughter. Not the woman she'd packed into a cardboard box.
Just some company.
Over the next 2 weeks, details poured in. Food arrangements, decorations,
Guest lists.
flower requests. And through every message, Mom sounded excited, almost happy. Meanwhile, Pine Ridge wasn't doing so well. Marcus called often, mostly to check in, sometimes to vent. Chelsea and Trent are fighting. About money? What else? What happened? Trent got laid off. I closed my eyes. Seriously?
Yep.
And Chelsea thought you'd eventually pay the SUV. Still.
He laughed.
You'd think reality would have arrived by now. And Dad, Marcus sighed. He mostly stays quiet. Mom, she blames everyone. That sounded familiar. What about Grandma? She asks about you every day. That one hurt. A week before the birthday party, Dad called again. This time, his voice sounded smaller somehow. Took your mother to the bank yesterday. I frowned. Everything okay?
No.
Silence. Then, I don't understand half the things she signs. My stomach tightened. Dad, Marcus says you stopped paying taxes. I did. I know. Another pause. I just didn't know you were paying them. Of course he didn't. Dad never handled the bills. Mom did. And I'd quietly filled the holes. Dad, were you aware of a home equity line? The silence that followed answered before he spoke. What line? My heartbeat slowed. You don't know?
No.
I spread through me. Never mind. Vanessa? It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing, because I knew that tone. Dad was confused.
Genuinely confused.
Which meant one thing. He hadn't signed it knowingly. And if Dad didn't understand it, then what exactly had Mom done? 3 days later, Marcus arrived at my office. Unannounced. His face looked pale. Closed the door. I stood immediately. What happened? He handed me a folder. Found this on the kitchen table. I opened it, then felt my blood turn cold. Home equity statements. Second notices. Late fees. $48,000. My mouth went dry. Marcus. There's more. He handed me another page. A loan application. My name. Not my signature, but my name. I stared. What is this? I think your mother used your business income to qualify.
No.
Marcus nodded. That's what I thought.
No.
My voice rose. She wouldn't. His eyes softened. Vanessa. I stopped. Because somewhere deep down, I knew. Not because Mom was evil, but because Mom had spent years believing my life belonged to the family. And people who believe something belongs to them don't think they're stealing. They think they're entitled. Rebecca entered the room. One look at my face, and she froze. What happened? I handed her the papers. She read them, then looked up. Lawyer. Immediately.
No.
Vanessa.
No. Now.
I need answers first. You need protection first. Marcus nodded. She's right. Rebecca pointed at the documents. This isn't forgotten bills. This isn't a misunderstanding. Someone put your name on financial documents. My stomach churned. What if Dad doesn't know? Then all the more reason.
She softened.
And if he doesn't know, he's a victim too. Victim. The word hit me strangely, because I'd spent so long seeing Dad as weak. But weakness and cruelty aren't always the same thing. Sometimes people simply spend so many years avoiding conflict that they surrender responsibility altogether. And maybe that's what Dad had done. That night, I sat alone on the porch at Seabrook Cottage. Grandma Eleanor's old sewing tin rested beside me. The ocean breeze moved softly through the hydrangeas. Inside the tin were dozens of memories. Buttons, old photographs, needles, and one envelope. Her handwriting. I frowned. I'd never noticed it before. Across the front, written in faded ink, were 4 words. For Vanessa, someday. My heartbeat slowed. Carefully, I opened it. Inside was a letter, and attached behind it, Another document. I unfolded the paper, then froze. Completely froze. Because clipped to Grandma Eleanor's handwritten note was the original deed to Seabrook Cottage. And, typed beneath it, not my name, not Grandma's, but another name entirely. A name I hadn't expected to see. A name that changed everything I thought I knew about the house. And suddenly, Grandma's 80th birthday party wasn't just going to reveal the truth about my mother. It was going to uncover a family secret nobody had seen coming. My hands trembled as I unfolded the yellowed paper. Attached behind Grandma Eleanor's letter was the original deed to Seabrook Cottage. But the name typed across the top wasn't mine. It wasn't Grandma's either. It was my grandfather's. Samuel Bennett, my grandfather. Grandma Eleanor had kept her maiden name after marrying, something I had never thought much about. Legally, the property had been purchased decades ago by Grandpa Samuel under a trust. And beneath his name was another, primary beneficiary, Vanessa Harper. I blinked, then blinked again.
No.
That couldn't be right. Grandpa had died when I was 16.
How?
My eyes moved to Grandma's letter. Her handwriting had become shaky in later years, but this letter was older, much older. Vanessa, if you're reading this, then I suspect life has done what life does and reminded you that people are imperfect. Don't let bitterness make you hard. Your grandfather loved this place more than anywhere on earth. He used to say that one day, when our oldest granddaughter became tired of carrying everyone else's troubles, she'd need somewhere quiet enough to hear herself think. He wanted that place to belong to you, not because you earned it, not because you sacrificed, because you deserved to have something that was yours. If your mother ever finds out, don't hate her. She was born with fear in her heart. Fear makes people hold too tightly. And remember something I've told you since you were little. People who love you should bring peace to your life, not invoices.
Love.
Grandma Eleanor. Tears blurred my vision. Not because of the house. Because for the first time in my life, someone had left me something without expecting anything in return. No conditions.
No obligations.
Just love. I sat there for nearly an hour with the letter in my lap. Then my phone rang.
Dad.
I answered. Hey. His voice sounded strained. Your mother wants to talk.
No.
Vanessa.
No, Dad.
Silence. Then quietly. She's scared. I laughed softly. So was I when she packed my clothes. Another silence. Then he whispered. Fair enough. I almost cried. Because for once, Dad hadn't defended her. He just accepted the truth. How's Grandma? I asked. Good. And you? Long pause. Tired. Not fine. Not okay. Just tired. And somehow, that honesty felt bigger than any apology. The week before Grandma's birthday, Rebecca became a machine. She organized flowers,
Food.
tables, photographers, everything. And she made sure every email went through Harbor Heritage Event Services. No names.
No clues.
Mom remained completely unaware. Actually, she seemed happier than Marcus had heard her in years. The ocean venue had become her obsession. Every phone call revolved around it. The pictures are beautiful. Mom is going to love it. Everybody will finally see what a special day I planned. Marcus nearly choked laughing when he told me. She's taking credit already. I smiled. Of course she is. And she's invited everyone. Everyone. Even people she hasn't spoken to in years. I laughed. That's dangerous. Marcus nodded.
Yeah.
Why? Because big audiences make your mother perform. The morning of Grandma Eleanor's birthday arrived with clear skies. The ocean shimmered under the sun. Hydrangeas bloomed around the porch. White tables stretched across the lawn. String lights hung from the trees. And Grandma's favorite jazz music floated through hidden speakers. Rebecca adjusted centerpieces. Everything ready? Perfect. Marcus arrived first. He stepped out of his truck and froze.
Holy hell.
You like it? Vanessa, this place. He shook his head. No wonder you kept it secret. Then his eyes softened. Grandma's going to cry. I smiled. Probably. And your mother? We'll see. By noon, cars started arriving.
Aunts.
Uncles, cousins, old neighbors, people I hadn't seen in years. And then, Mom's SUV appeared, followed by Dad's truck. Chelsea and Trent climbed out arguing before the engine even shut off. Dad stepped out slowly, and Grandma Eleanor emerged from the passenger seat. The moment she saw the ocean,
She stopped.
completely stopped. Tears filled her eyes. "Oh, Sammy." She whispered Grandpa's name. "Oh, Sammy." I walked toward her. She turned and smiled. "My girl." I hugged her gently. Then she looked past me, at the porch, at the hydrangeas, at the white rocking chairs, and suddenly she laughed. A soft, knowing laugh. "You finally came home." Behind her, Mom stood frozen. Not because she saw me. She expected me to attend.
No.
She was admiring the property, showing it off, already talking loudly. "I spent months finding this place." She smiled proudly at Aunt Linda. "Mom always wanted the ocean, and I made it happen." Rebecca, standing beside me, almost inhaled her own tongue, trying not to laugh. Marcus looked ready to explode. Dad stared at me, then at the house, then at me again. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Not of the property, of the curtains, the blue shutters, the furniture, the little details. Things he'd seen in photos I'd shown him years ago when he'd barely looked. His eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing. I squeezed Grandma's hand. "Let's enjoy your birthday." And I let Mom have her moment. I let her tell stories, accept compliments,
Take pictures.
smile for everyone. Because some people build their own stages. And eventually, they perform long enough for the curtain to rise. And when it did, everyone would finally see what stood behind it. And this time, I wasn't going to stop them. Grandma Eleanor spent the first hour smiling more than I'd seen her smile in years. She sat in one of the white rocking chairs overlooking the water, wrapped in a light blue shawl while cousins and old friends stopped by to hug her. Every few minutes, she'd look out toward the ocean and whisper quietly, "Oh, Sammy would have loved this." And every time she said it, I smiled, because somehow he had. Mom, meanwhile, had transformed into the hostess of the century. She moved from table to table accepting compliments as though she'd personally designed the coastline. "I wanted something elegant," she told Aunt Linda. "Mom deserved one perfect day." "Oh, Diane, you outdid yourself," Mrs. Hanley gushed. Mom smiled modestly. It wasn't easy finding a place like this. Nearby, Rebecca nearly dropped a tray, trying not to laugh. Marcus escaped to the drink station because he couldn't trust himself not to snort. Chelsea, however, looked irritated. She and Trent had apparently spent the entire drive arguing. She kept checking her phone every few minutes, probably watching overdue notices pile up. Not my problem. For the first time in my life. Not my problem. Dad stayed unusually quiet. His eyes kept drifting around the property.
The porch.
The furniture. The old brass lantern by the door. Something nagged at him. He couldn't place it, but something was familiar. Eventually, he walked over. "You've been here before." It wasn't a question. I smiled. Couple of times. His eyes narrowed.
No.
Then realization hit him. His face changed. "The pictures." I nodded. "The ones you showed me. The ones you said looked peaceful." "Yeah." He swallowed. "You own this place." Not a question. I nodded. His shoulders sagged. Not in anger. Not in shock. But in understanding. And maybe regret. He looked around. Then back at me. "You built this. Years ago." His eyes grew damp. "You never told us." I laughed softly. "You never asked." The truth hit him like a wave. Because it was true. Nobody had ever asked. Not what I wanted. Not what I dreamed about. Not what I'd built. They only asked what I could provide. Dad nodded slowly. Then, in the quietest voice I'd ever heard from him, he said,
I'm sorry. No excuses.
"No but." Just 2 words. And somehow, that mattered. Lunch was served. Grandma opened gifts. The grandkids sang terribly. The cousins laughed. For a while, it felt almost normal, until Mom stood and tapped her wine glass. "Oh, everyone, here we go." Marcus closed his eyes. Rebecca muttered under her breath, "Showtime." Mom smiled broadly. "I just want to thank everyone for being here today." Applause. And especially thank myself. Even Aunt Linda blinked, because I promised Mom one last birthday by the ocean, and I made it happen. More applause. I searched for weeks to find this hidden treasure. She gestured proudly toward the house. Mom always dreamed of a place like this. Grandma smiled politely. Mom continued, "And after all the hardships our family has endured, I think we deserve days like this." Rebecca stared at the ground. Marcus was biting his lip. Dad looked uncomfortable. Chelsea checked her makeup. And Mom kept going. "This house feels like family." She laughed. "Honestly, I wish we could stay forever." Then she smiled dramatically. "Maybe one day." The crowd laughed. Then Mom spread her arms. I just wanted everyone to know how much work went into giving Mom this beautiful celebration.
And she paused.
Waiting for praise, waiting for admiration, waiting for applause, which she got, until Grandma Eleanor spoke.
Softly, clearly.
"Diane." Mom smiled. "Yes, Mom?" "Hush." Silence. Everyone froze. Grandma adjusted her shawl and looked directly at her daughter. The girl gave me my porch back. The entire lawn went quiet. Mom blinked.
"What?"
Grandma pointed her shaky hand toward me. "Vanessa." Mom's smile faltered. Grandma looked around at everyone. "This wasn't your gift." Another silence. "This place belongs to my granddaughter." The applause died instantly. Aunt Linda's mouth opened. Mrs. Hamley nearly spilled her tea. Marcus stared at the sky, pretending not to enjoy this. Rebecca suddenly became fascinated with flower arrangements. Mom laughed nervously. Mom's confused. Grandma's eyes sharpened. "No, dir." She pointed toward the ocean. "Sammy left this place for her." Then she smiled proudly. "And she brought me home." Dad stood frozen. Chelsea looked utterly lost. Trent whispered, "Wait, she owns this place?" Nobody answered, because the answer was standing right there.
Me.
Mom's face turned pale. "You own this." I nodded. Silence. Then Aunt Linda, incapable of whispering, said loudly, "Diane, I thought you rented this." Mom's eyes darted around. I did." Rebecca finally stepped forward. "Actually, Harbor Heritage Event Services managed the reservation." Mom turned. "Yes." Rebecca smiled sweetly. "And Vanessa owns Harbor Heritage." Chelsea's jaw dropped. "No way." Marcus coughed into his drink.
Dad sat down heavily.
And for the first time in her life, my mother had no stage, no audience.
No script.
Just truth. Then Aunt Linda, who possessed all the subtlety of a marching band, asked, "Diane, isn't this the daughter you threw out?" Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And Mom, for the first time anyone could remember, had absolutely nothing to say. The silence that settled over the lawn felt heavier than the ocean air. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for their drinks. Even the children seemed to sense something had changed. Mom stood frozen, her smile gone. Chelsea looked back and forth between me and the house. Trent stared at the porch as if it had personally insulted him. And Aunt Linda, blissfully unaware that some thoughts should stay inside your head, repeated herself. "Diane, isn't this the daughter you kicked out?" Mom's eyes flashed. "We didn't kick her out." Nobody spoke.
Not me.
Not Dad. Not Marcus. But silence has a funny way of agreeing with truth. Grandma Eleanor sighed. "You packed her things." Mom turned immediately. "Mom, you don't understand." "I understand plenty." Grandma's voice remained soft. "More than you think." The old woman looked toward me and smiled. She always drove to us. Then her eyes settled on Mom. But nobody ever drove to her. Those words landed harder than any shouting could have. Dad lowered his head. Chelsea crossed her arms. Okay, but she left. Nobody forced her. Marcus nearly choked. Before anyone else could speak, Dad looked up. That's enough. Everyone froze, including me, because my father almost never raised his voice. He looked at Chelsea. Your sister didn't leave. He swallowed hard. We let her go.
Chelsea blinked.
Mom turned toward him. Walter.
No.
His voice wasn't loud, but for the first time in my life, he didn't retreat. He stood, slowly, painfully, like a man learning how to stand after years in the same chair. We let her carry everything.
He looked at me.
The taxes. Then at Mom. The insurance. Then Chelsea. The car. His eyes filled with tears. And I folded her shirts into a box. Nobody spoke. Because what do you say to that? Dad shook his head. I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet. He laughed bitterly. Turns out all I did was make one person pay for everyone else's peace. Mom stared at him like she'd never seen him before. Diane, Aunt Linda said carefully, is that true? Mom looked trapped, cornered, and cornered people either tell the truth or swing. She chose to swing. Oh, so now everybody's against me? There it was. The familiar script. I'm the villain now. Nobody answered.
She pointed at me.
Vanessa has always been stronger. Her voice cracked. She never needed anything. I smiled sadly.
No, Mom. She turned toward me.
You always landed on your feet. I nodded, because nobody ever let me fall. Tears filled her eyes. I lost 2 babies before Chelsea. I know. You don't understand that pain. I do understand. No, you don't. Her voice broke. I spent my whole life terrified of losing my children. I looked at her quietly. And somewhere along the way, you forgot you had 2. The tears stopped. So, did the excuses. Because deep down, she knew. Dad knew. Even Chelsea knew. The problem wasn't that Mom loved Chelsea. The problem was that she'd assumed I'd survive without love. And maybe I had. But surviving isn't the same thing as being seen. Grandma Eleanor suddenly chuckled. Everyone turned. What? Mom asked. The old woman smiled. Samuel used to say something.
She pointed toward me.
When people keep taking water from the same well, they shouldn't act surprised when it runs dry. Then she pointed toward Mom. And if the well walks away, don't blame the water. Marcus looked like he wanted to frame the quote. Rebecca wiped away tears. And Dad laughed softly. His first real laugh in months. Even Aunt Linda smiled. Only Mom stood motionless. Because for the first time, nobody was rescuing her. Nobody was agreeing. Nobody was making me responsible. Then Chelsea stood up.
Fine.
Everyone looked at her. She pointed toward me. You act like you're perfect. I laughed.
No.
You think you're better than us.
No.
You embarrass Mom. I blinked. I embarrass Mom? She crossed her arms. You could have told us you own this place. I smiled. You could have asked. Silence. Chelsea opened her mouth, then closed it, because she realized something. She'd spent years knowing exactly how much I could do for her, and absolutely nothing about who I was. She didn't know my favorite color. She'd never visited my office, never asked about my projects, never cared, because I wasn't a sister. I was an emergency contact with a checking account, and somewhere behind the anger, I saw something unfamiliar.
Fear.
Not fear of losing me, fear of losing what I provided. And strangely enough, that realization brought me peace. Because you can't lose something you never truly had. Grandma Eleanor suddenly reached for my hand. My girl. I bent down. She smiled.
I'm tired.
You want to go inside? She nodded. Take me home. I smiled through tears. Okay. And as I helped her toward the porch, she squeezed my hand and whispered softly enough that only I could hear. You finally stopped fixing the wrong house. I nearly broke, because she was right. For 18 months, maybe my whole life, I'd been trying to save a house that wasn't mine. And all along, the one worth saving had been waiting quietly by the ocean. And for the first time in my life, I had the key. Grandma Eleanor rested for a while inside the house. Most of the guests drifted back toward the lawn, speaking in hushed voices. The atmosphere had changed. The celebration wasn't ruined, but the masks had come off. People weren't gossiping. They were remembering all the times I'd quietly picked up checks, remembering who drove Grandma to appointments, who fixed roofs, who paid bills, who always showed up. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't reminding anyone. The truth was doing the work for me. I sat on the porch steps, staring out at the ocean when Dad slowly lowered himself beside me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he said, "Your grandfather built that bench." I smiled. Grandma told me. He nodded. He proposed to her right there. He pointed toward the edge of the dunes. I looked at him. "When did you know?" "About the house?"
No.
"About everything." Dad laughed softly. "Long before the heart attack." I frowned. "Then why?" His eyes remained fixed on the waves. "Because keeping your mother happy was easier than fighting."
He swallowed.
"And because you made it easy." I smiled sadly. "That's not exactly a compliment."
No.
His voice cracked. "It isn't." He rubbed his hands together. "When I was a boy, my father used to yell until everybody gave in. I learned early that peace meant surrender." He looked at me. "But you know what I never realized?" "What?" "Peace for one person can become prison for somebody else." Tears stood in his eyes. "And I made a prison out of you." I reached over and took his hand. "Dad."
No.
He shook his head. "Let me say this." His voice trembled. "I don't expect forgiveness." He glanced toward the house. "But I hope one day you can look at me and not see the man with the cardboard box." I squeezed his hand. "I already don't." His face crumpled. And for the first time since his heart attack, my father cried. Not quietly. Not behind closed doors. He cried like a man mourning the years he'd missed. And I cried with him. Not because everything was fixed, but because honesty had finally entered the room. Mom left early. No scene.
No shouting. No dramatic exit.
Just silence. Chelsea followed. Trent close behind. Neither said goodbye. Marcus watched them leave. "Think she'll come around?" I shrugged. "That's up to her." "And if she doesn't?" I looked at the ocean. "Then she doesn't." Marcus nodded. "Fair enough." Then he grinned. "You know Aunt Linda already called 3 cousins." I laughed. "Of course she did. The whole county will know by tomorrow." "Probably." "And, honestly?" He smiled. "Good." The next week brought surprises. Not for Mom. From Dad. He called every few days. Sometimes about nothing. Weather. Fishing.
Grandma.
Sometimes he'd sit quietly on the phone for minutes. And somehow, that was enough. Then one Saturday morning, a truck pulled into Seabrook Cottage. Dad climbed out. Alone. He carried a toolbox. I stepped onto the porch. "What are you doing?" He held up the box. "Heard your back gate squeaks." I laughed. "It does." He nodded. "Thought maybe we could fix it."
No speeches.
No grand gestures. Just a squeaky gate. And somehow, that meant everything. We spent 3 hours replacing hinges. Mostly in silence. Then we sat on the porch with lemonade. Grandma Eleanor asleep inside. Dad stared at the ocean. "Pretty place." "It is." He smiled. "You know, your mother always hated the beach." I laughed. "Seriously?" "Too much sand." We both burst out laughing. And it felt good. Not because things were normal. Because they weren't. But because something new was growing. Something smaller. Something quieter. Something honest. 3 weeks later, Rebecca walked into my office waving papers. Guess who just booked the church restoration project? I stood up.
No.
Yes. I hugged her. The biggest contract we'd landed in years. The company was thriving again. Life was moving forward.
Not backward.
Forward. That evening, I drove to Maple Grove to see Grandma. She was sitting by the window, watching birds. She smiled when I walked in. My girl.
He sat beside her.
You remember me? She laughed. Vanessa. I'd remember you if I was 99 and blind. I smiled. Good. She studied me carefully. You look different.
Ido.
Lighter. I laughed. Maybe.
No.
She nodded firmly. Lighter. Then she patted my hand. Did you finally stop carrying everybody? I smiled. Mostly.
Good.
She leaned back. Because old women know things. Oh.
She grinned.
The people who love you shouldn't make you tired all the time. I kissed her forehead. I know. She closed her eyes. And remember something else.
What?
If someone knocks because they love you, she smiled softly. Give them a key. Her eyes drifted shut for her afternoon nap, and I sat there holding her hand, listening to her breathe, watching the sunlight spill across the room, thinking about everything I'd spent years trying to save, thinking about everything I'd almost lost, and realizing something simple. Family isn't a debt. It isn't a contract. It isn't an invoice that never stops arriving. Family is a door, and I'm done holding it open for people who only knock when they need something. But the ones who knock because they love the person inside, those people always get a key. If you enjoyed this story, just like and subscribe the channel. It will encourage me to make more stories like it. Till next video, goodbye.